There is someone you speak to more than anybody else in your life. Someone whose opinions you hear from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. Someone who comments on your mistakes, judges your decisions, questions your ability, and influences how you feel about yourself. And that person is you. The words you repeatedly say to yourself don't simply disappear into the backyard of your mind. They shape what you believe. They influence what you expect, and over time they can quietly determine what you believe is possible for your life. And in this video we're going to look deeply at why self-talk matters so much, how it influences your emotions, your confidence, your behaviour, and even your sense of identity. Because the conversation happening inside your head may be shaping far more of your life than you realise. Hi, I'm Dave and welcome to today's Minecraft. And this channel is here to help caring, thoughtful and overwhelmed people create a calmer mind, overcome self-doubt, build self-esteem that is more genuine, and develop a kinder, healthier relationship with themselves. And few things are more important to that relationship than the way you speak to yourself. Now, when we talk about self-talk, we're not only talking about the obvious thoughts that you consciously notice, things like, I'm not good enough, I always mess things up, I can't cope with this, or the old favourite, why can't I just get myself together? Self-talk also includes the quieter commentary running beneath the surface, the little conclusions you reach about yourself, the meanings you attach to what happens, or the story you tell yourself when something goes wrong. Now, two people can experience exactly the same setback and speak to themselves in completely different ways. One person might say, well, that didn't go as planned, what can I learn from it? The other might say, there we are, I knew I wasn't capable. And the event may be the same, but the internal conversation creates a completely different emotional experience. One person sees a difficult moment, the other sees evidence that there is something completely wrong with them, and that difference matters because your mind is always listening to the language you repeatedly use. Self-talk becomes particularly powerful when it stops sounding like an opinion and starts sounding like a fact. You no longer think, I'm having a difficult day. You begin telling yourself, I can't cope. You no longer think, I made a mistake. You tell yourself, I'm useless. And you no longer think, I feel nervous about this. You say, I'm not confident. And notice what happens there. A temporary experience becomes a permanent identity. You move from describing something that is happening to defining who you are. And that's where self-talk can become deeply limiting. Because when you repeatedly tell yourself who you are, your mind begins looking for evidence to support the story. If you tell yourself, I'm awkward around people, you'll notice every uncomfortable silence and overlook the conversations that went perfectly well. If you tell yourself, I never finish anything, you'll remember every abandoned project and forget the many responsibilities you quietly complete every day. And if you tell yourself nothing ever works out for me, your mind may begin collecting disappointments like a particularly miserable stamp album. And after a while, the story feels completely true. Not necessarily because it is true, but because you've rehearsed it so many times. Because the pictures and the beliefs and the expectations we repeatedly hold in our mind strongly influence the way we perform and the way we live. Thus the importance of our internal pictures of ourselves, because we rarely behave consistently above the image we hold of who we are. So if you see yourself as incapable, unworthy, or destined to struggle, you may unconsciously make decisions that keep that picture in place. You may avoid opportunities, you may give up too quickly, you may give up on yourself and dismiss compliments. You may stay silent when you have something valuable to say, not because you don't have ability, but because your inner conversation keeps pulling you back towards the familiar version of yourself. And it's important to understand that meaningful change often begins on the inside. Before your external life changes, you may need to change the internal picture, the one you're repeatedly reinforcing. And self-talk is one of the main ways that picture is maintained. The language that we use affects our emotional state, and the words you choose can intensify an experience or soften it. For example, there's a difference between saying, I'm absolutely terrified, and saying, I feel a little uncertain. And there's a difference between, this is a complete disaster, and This is difficult, but I can work through it. The situation may not have changed, but the language changes the way your nervous system responds to it. Words carry emotional weight, and when you repeatedly use dramatic absolute language with yourself, words such as always, never, impossible, disaster, hopeless, you can turn a difficult moment into a full internal emergency. Your body responds to the story your mind is telling. Your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your thoughts speed up, and before long, you're not only dealing with the original situation, you're also dealing with the emotional storm created by the way you have described it to yourself. And that doesn't mean we should pretend everything is wonderful. It doesn't mean standing in front of a mirror shouting, "I'm unstoppable," while quietly wondering whether you remember to put the bins out. Healthy self-talk is not about denying reality. It's about describing reality in a way that is honest without being unnecessarily cruel or catastrophizing. It's the difference between saying this is challenging and I can't handle this. Between I feel disappointed and my life is ruined. Between I'm still learning and I'm a failure. We also really need to understand the importance of what we allow to influence our minds. We need to carefully consider what information we take in, what ideas we listen to, and which people influence us. But sometimes we forget that one of the most constant influences in our life is our own voice. You could listen to the most encouraging speaker in the world for half an hour. But if you spend the remaining 23 and a half hours telling yourself that you're useless, the internal voice is probably going to win. Because repetition matters. You don't form your self-image from one single thought. You form it from the thoughts you practice, the phrases you repeat, the conclusions you continually reach, and a personal story you keep rehearsing. And this is why self-talk has such a strong influence on everyday life. It affects whether you speak up or remain quiet, whether you apply for the opportunity or talk yourself out of it, whether you recover from mistakes or punish yourself for 3 days, whether you set a boundary or convince yourself that your needs don't matter, whether you walk into a room thinking, I have every right to be here, or everybody else is probably more capable than me. Self-talk can affect how you receive kindness too. Someone compliments you and you immediately dismiss it. They're only being polite. You achieve something and tell yourself, it wasn't a big deal. You survive a difficult period, and instead of recognising your resilience, you focus on everything you think you could have handled better. You may speak to yourself in a way that constantly moves the finishing line further ahead from where it was. Nothing is ever quite good enough. Nothing counts for very long. Every success is minimised and every mistake is magnified. And then you wonder why your confidence never seems to grow. Confidence can't easily take root in soil that's constantly being poisoned by self-criticism. Self-esteem is not only shaped by what other people say to you, it's also shaped by what you repeatedly say about yourself to yourself. Imagine for a moment having somebody beside you all day long saying, you'll probably get this wrong. You're not as good as everybody else. You should have done better. You look ridiculous. Don't even bother trying. You probably want a little distance from that person, to say the least. Possibly several counties of distance. But when that voice is internal, we can become so accustomed to it that we no longer question whether it's fair, helpful, or even accurate. We assume that because the thought came from our own mind, it must be true. But thoughts are not automatically facts. Sometimes thoughts are habits. Sometimes they're old messages we absorbed from other people. Sometimes they're fear trying to protect us. And sometimes they're voices of a younger version of us who learned that staying small felt safer. And sometimes they're simply well-practiced nonsense. And one of the central principles of my Minecraft framework is that first we must map where we are. And before we can change our inner conversation, we need to become aware of it. We need to notice the language we use, the labels we place upon ourselves, and the assumptions we make, and the emotional patterns that follow. You might begin by asking, what do I say to myself when I make a mistake? What do I tell myself when I feel nervous? What story do I create when somebody disagrees with me? What do I say internally when I see somebody else succeeding? And perhaps most importantly, would I speak this way to somebody I genuinely cared about? And that question can be quite revealing, because many caring people offer understanding and patience and encouragement to everybody but themselves. They'll tell a friend, you're doing your best, but tell themselves you need to try harder. They'll tell somebody else, one mistake doesn't define you, but say internally, I always ruin everything. They'll remind another person to rest and to look after themselves, while treating their own exhaustion as some sort of character defect. And this is where a kinder form of self-talk becomes so important. Not soft, not unrealistic, not avoiding responsibility. Just kind, honest, constructive. The kind of voice that acknowledges a mistake without turning it into a personal attack. The kind of voice that says, that didn't go well, but I can learn from it. I'm struggling today, but that doesn't mean I'm not capable. I feel nervous, but I can still take the next small step. This is difficult and I don't have to solve everything at once. Because healthy self-talk doesn't remove every problem from your life, but it changes the person who faces the problem. So instead of facing difficulty while attacking yourself, you begin facing it with yourself on your own side, and that can change everything. You become more willing to try, more able to recover, more open to learning, and more likely to take action even when you feel uncertain. You stop using your own mind as a courtroom in which you're permanently on trial, and instead begin using it as a workshop, a place where thoughts are examined, beliefs can be questioned, and new ways of responding can be crafted. And this is what mindcraft means. Not controlling every thought, not forcing yourself to be positive all of the time, but learning how to work with your mind more deliberately and more intentionally. Because self-talk isn't merely something you hear, it's something you practice. And what you practice becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar begins to feel natural. And what feels natural often shapes how you live. So, over the next few days, I'd like you to notice your internal language. Don't judge it. Don't immediately try to correct every thought. Simply notice. Become curious. Listen for the repeated phrases and notice when you use words such as always, never, useless, hopeless or impossible. And notice when you turn a temporary emotion into an identity. And notice whether your inner voice is helping you to move forward or keeping you trapped inside an old picture of yourself. Because awareness is where change begins. And in the next video we're going to build upon this. We're going to look at how to challenge unhelpful self-talk, how to replace it without using false positivity, and how to begin creating an inner voice that is calmer, stronger, more supportive and more believable. You may have been speaking to yourself in the same way for many years, but that doesn't mean the conversation can't change. And when the conversation changes, your choices can change. Your confidence can change. Your emotional state can change. And gradually the direction of your life can begin to change too. So if this video has helped you to consider how you talk to yourself, please consider subscribing, liking and sharing it with somebody who may need to hear it today so they can start to talk to themselves more kindly. As always, thank you for being here. Take good and kind care of yourself and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.